Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Fraser. I'm the director here at the Albright Institute. You're very, very welcome. And there's a lot of new faces here for us, and that's a fantastic thing. If you want to go onto our webpage, you'll find all the events that we do here at the Albright, several of them being public lectures, and you are welcome to come to every single one of them. Tonight, though, we've got something which is a bit special because this is a joint event between us here at the Albright in Jerusalem and with Tel Aviv University and the Koret Center for Jewish Civilization. Joining together, of course, to launch Jodi Magness's new book, The Faith, I think, that launched 1,000 books, Jerusalem Through the Ages, from its beginnings to the Crusades. Wow. I'm not sure Jodi needs a huge introduction, to be honest. However, to give you the cliff notes, Jodi is the Keenan Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And this book is the culmination of her research undertaken when she was a Albright Fellow at the Tel Aviv University and is the Gitin Professorship Fellow or Fellowship here at the Albright during 2022. Now watch this space, because we'll be doing a lot of book launches over the next 6 months or so. And I think this is the book equivalent of the baby boom of the COVID period, where everyone finally had some time to write. Jodi certainly made the most of it. It is somewhat tongue-in-cheek that we have a book launch with no books. I'll spare you the saga of trying to get a box of books here. The take-home message is that you will see in the cloisters 5 books there for display only. However, you will see flyers there as well. If you grab a flyer, you will see that there is a discount code for 30% off if you purchase through Oxford University Press. Details on the flyer. For those at Zoom, details are in the chat. But if you want to write it down, and I will repeat this code at the end of the evening, it is all caps AAFLYG6. AAFLYG6. I'll repeat it later. What we've got for you tonight is actually more a panel discussion than a single presentation. And I'm going to hand over to our panel chair, Professor Noam. Professor Noam is Professor of Talmud at Tel Aviv University and the recipient of the Israel Prize for Talmud in 2020. She has, since 2017, served as chair for the Chaim Rosenberg School of Jewish Studies and Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. And I'll leave it to Professor Noam to introduce the panel. Please, thank you.
Do you hear me? It is with great pleasure that I open the book launch event for my friend Jodi Magness's Jerusalem Through the Ages, from its beginnings to the Crusades. I cannot detail naturally the contents of this excellent, comprehensive book. That's the panelist test. Rather, I simply note that the book demonstrates 2 of Jodi's special abilities, which are unusual in our academic community. The first is the ability to present detailed, up-to-date academic information with which uncompromisingly reviews the full conclusions and controversies of the current research, at the same time making this information accessible to the general public in a clear, fluent, even gripping manner. As Jodi states in the introduction, quote, "I believe that as specialists, we have a responsibility to share with the public as objectively as possible detailed and scientific information about Jerusalem's history and archaeology," end quote. I suggest that we as scholars, Israeli scholars in particular, memorize and implement this statement. The second is Jodi's ability to draw a broad, comprehensive picture spanning thousands of years without sacrificing precision in detailing the different sites and periods. I provide 2 short examples. First, of the academic accuracy that is clearly, briefly, and pertinently presented to the general public. Second, of Jodi's engaging, broad, meta-historical viewpoint. The first regards Jodi's treatment of the complex question of the Hasmonean Akra. Jodi first surveys all the literary sources, the Book of Maccabees, the Epistle of Aristeas, and Josephus. She does not omit the doubtful identification of the Ptolemaic Acra described in Aristeas with the Acra built by Antiochus IV, or the contradictory testimonies of First Maccabees, which tells of Simon Maccabeus' renovation of the fortress, and of Josephus, who recounts that Simon destroyed it. She summarizes Bezalel Bar Kokhba's analysis of the literary sources and his proposed solution for the location of the Acra. She then reviews the entire history of the archaeological excavations at the site, including the hypothesis, both correct and erroneous, of the excavators from Crowfoot and Fitzgerald in the 20s, through Kathleen Canyon in the 60s, Yigal Shiloh in the 80s, up to Doron Ben-Ami and Yana Chechanovich in 2015, including the use of the recent study from 2021 by Dr. Ayala Zilberstein, who wrote her PhD on the Acra at our School of Jewish Studies and Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. This tangled web is summarized with exemplary clarity in less than 4 pages. My second example is the description in the epilogue of General Allenby's conquest of Jerusalem in 1917. Jodi describes how Allenby dismounted his horse and entered Jaffa Gate on foot in a public display of piety. She describes how this display continues, on the one hand, a long historical tradition of reverence for Jerusalem, and on the other hand, reveals the broad appeal of the Crusades in early 20th century Britain. I quote, Allenby's arrival harkened back to Heraclius, who reportedly displayed his humility by dismounting from his horse and removing his shoes and shirt, evoking David's and Jesus' triumphal entries. Less than 2 decades later, the Caliph Umar is said to have entered the city on camelback, wearing simple camel hair garments. According to one account, when Jerusalem fell to the Crusaders, Godfrey de Bouillon emulated Heraclius' public demonstration of piety by entering the city barefoot and shirtless. Jerusalem's surrender to Allenby was greeted enthusiastically by the public as fulfillment of the Crusader quest, describing Allenby and his soldiers as modern Crusaders. The book thus ends with an inspiring reflection on continuity, change, and reverence in the eternal story of Jerusalem. And with that, I would like to invite our panelists to discuss Jerusalem through the ages. And we will begin with Professor Yuval Gadot, an old friend and colleague, who has the Sonia and Mark Conader Institute of Archaeology and is the Vice Dean at Tel Aviv University. He is a lead archaeologist at the City of David Excavation Project and also leads an environmental study of the rural landscape surrounding the city. Yuval was also the field director of the excavation at Ramat Rachel site and the head archaeologist of the project, Ancient Israel Through the Lens of Natural and Exact Sciences, which combines science and archaeology. Gadot has authored 7 archaeological books and over 100 scientific articles. Yuval.
Hold it in my hand. That's the rule. I'll hold it in my hand. Good afternoon, everybody here and everybody on the Zoom. And I want to start by thanking Jodi for inviting me to be a panelist in this panel, and also the Noam and the Yuval. This has to be here. Yeah. And Vered Noam and Yuval Rotman, who's organized it. And I don't know if he's here. Professor Yuval Rotman from the Koret Center. And I will start with some comments, and I wish to start by quoting Jodi, conclusions regarding the Persian period. This is the last period I feel comfortable speaking about in Jerusalem. That's on page 153. You can go check over there in the cloister. And Jodi writes, thus the Persian period can be viewed as a bridge between the past, pre-Exilic period, present, post-Exilic, and future Massenaic era. Apart from the many, and that's the end of the quote, apart from the many detailed descriptions and evaluations of the nature and scope of Jerusalem in each and every period in time, and there you get wonderful examples, another important strength of the book holds its ability to observe long-term processes and how each and every period is shaped by its preceding period. At the same time, each period serves serves to shape future generations and periods. Perception of Jerusalem as it changes and evolves is something that only very, very few scholars are able to hold and comprehend. And I congratulate you, Jodi, Professor Magness, on being one of these few persons. So this is one of, I think, really one of the biggest strengths in looking for such a long range of periods. The book goes through many transformations, and every time a new chapter of the book begins, it always with a realization of what has changed, but also what does continue and how. Except for the very beginning of Jerusalem, it was never really a clean board, and something from the past is always taken into the next period and into the future. Even after severe destructions and catastrophic events, this is happening. And my two colleagues who will speak after me have written at length on how early Roman Jerusalem city shaped the late Roman area of Capitolina, Shlomit, and how the Byzantine city is really the base for understanding the early Islamic city, the Umayyad city. This is Gadot. I wish to use this unique perspective, and by utilizing the experience me and Iftach gained from the excavations at Givati parking lot, which we direct together, I will try to delve deeper into the transition between the Iron Age into the Persian period, maybe if I dare, even go into a little bit into the Hasmonean period. What hopefully will be clearer is how the memory of the golden age of Jerusalem during the 8th and 7th centuries BCE up to 586 destruction lingered into the Persian period and then into the Hasmonean city. In a way, these memories are still shaping our very own cultures today. Chapter 4 of the book offers a lengthy discussion of Jerusalem's heydays, a huge fortified city, larger than any other southern Levantine city at the time. While reading the book, you can learn of the city's water systems, monumental buildings, writing, administrations, and even affluent burial customs and tombs. One such building is Building 100 that Jodi describes and was dug at Givati parking lots. The building was really, and this is something that Iftach and I published a few articles about, was really a symbol of affluence and of control. By this 8th and 7th century, the area of Givati parking lot is really the hub. It's not the temple, it's not the palace, but it's the hub. It's the bus central station, if you wish, that connects all parts of the city, the southeastern ridge, the temple, and the western hill, Mount Zion. And the building is built of ashlar stones and has ivories, and there has wine, and everything is there. And there's some kind of administration going on there with the Tula that were found. And it feels like and it's two-story building, and it feels like everybody was seeing this building. It's the Teropon Valley is now serving as the kind of the way through that everybody goes from the pool to the temple or to other parts of the city. And whenever they walked by, they said, "Oh, this elite," or "I want to be this elite," whatever. But it was a symbol of how affluent and connected Jerusalem became during this last century of its existence. In 586 BCE, the building was heavily destroyed and became simply collapsed ruin. A study led by Nitzan Shalom, which is another PhD student of our school, was able to demonstrate that the Babylonians did not destroy every single building in the city. Instead, they focused on buildings that at the time were symbols of power. I always compare it to the taking down of Saddam Hussein's monuments at Baghdad. There's no need to destroy the whole city. You just make sure that the point is taken. And when they came to Building 100, of course, they saw it as a symbol. Everybody saw it as a symbol, so they invested a lot of energy and knowledge in making sure this building collapses down and burns down, and nobody is able to rebuild it. The second floor collapsed into the first floor. And I think that in 585, the devastation that the Babylonians left behind was very, very clear, even if the city was not completely empty, or it doesn't really matter for that sake. So a symbol of wealth became a symbol of what happens if you play around with the empire and then betray the empire. And when we move into the 5th century, maybe even 6th century, but definitely in the 5th century BC, the early part of the Persian period, we see that people come back into the same building. They live within the ruins. There's one small room that is kind of being reused, and a space in front that is becoming reused. This is something that Alon de Groot published from the Ashler's building at Area E. So it's not a specific location. These two buildings made of Ashlers, both of them destroyed, and now we see life in them. At first, we thought that we are speaking about squatters, people that just made a living over there. But when the material culture was studied, we found their food habits was not much different than those of the Iron Age before them. So it's not refugees' food. Fish bones were found there from the Persian period, including species that did not reach Jerusalem before. There are maybe 1 or 2 bulea dating to the Persian period that enter this area, and other things that tells us it's not really squattering. It's almost, I will say, a choice to live within these ruins. And I think if you look around in Jerusalem, you see that this phenomenon continues. For those people living within the ruins, the memory of the Babylonian destruction is not something they read in a book. And I'm not talking about 50 years or even 70 years after. I'm talking about 200 years later. They wake up in the morning and they walk within the ruins. And they did not try to bury them and live above them. They did not try to kind of hide them somehow. It's a very, very physical thing that is existing in their everydayness. So for those of you who fast on the 9th of Ab and go to synagogue and read the scrolls of Eicha, then this is not something, then try to recollect this idea of the destruction. This is not them. They woke up in the morning and this is what they see and this is what they live. So a building that is standing in ruin becomes an agent of memory. It tells the story of, if I take it as a family, when a person comes, a father comes in the morning and his sons ask him, what is this? He says, oh, this is, and now the Babylonians would hope that he would say, this is what happens if you betray an empire. But what he actually says is, this is the work of our great, great predecessors. Probably he told them that this is David or Solomon, and the stories of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, as he understood them in the Book of Kings and so on. We as archaeologists know that it's 8th and 7th century, but memory agent does not ask archaeologists, even though we think that we make the decisions. So it becomes again a symbol, this time a symbol of how great Jerusalem was. Sorry for quoting American politics now. How great Jerusalem was, and it's a very, very active symbol in their really everydayness. It's not a memory, and maybe this will explain why all of you have excavated in places that were ruined, and I think the memory has vanished. But Jerusalem's destruction in 586 is something that we go to the opera and think about. So it's a very, very active memory in today, and maybe this is the reason. It had 200 years to be recharged and recharged and recharged until the early Hellenistic period, and this is the time that the ruins are being buried under a new building that is simply, the Hellenistics have other ideas about this symbol. It's not comfortable to live there, and they bury it below ground and raise the floor level of the new buildings. While doing that, they kind of erased the memory agent that was speaking about the destruction and was speaking also about how affluent and wonderful Jerusalem was before. Eternal Jerusalem, he said in his book. And this is where I dare to move a little bit forward. Not all of Jerusalem went through the same process. Other parts of the city that were left in ruin were still visible even through the early Hasmonean periods. And this is the area of Mount Zion, the Western Hill, under the Jewish and Aramaic quarters today. These areas simply stood idle for something like 400 years without anybody really living there. Maybe they were, but it's not taken over by the city. And they kept on being seen by people who lived in the southeastern hill and whatever Temple Mount was at the time. And the first person to rebuild anything in that area is Seymour, I read in your book, in his later days, and this is the work that I think you mentioned before. The first Hasmonean king that, although it's been argued, recreated the fortifications of Jerusalem. And by doing that, he came back to the walls that were left half ruined in the Iron Age period, at the end of the Iron Age period. And this is described in all of the literature, how the first wall is really following the Iron Age wall. But Hillel Geva has wrote a lot about the fact that they are going into an area that is still uninhabited at that time. So they're not fortifying, like if we go back to the Iron Age where they fortify where the houses were, ruining some of these houses. Now they are fortifying a landscape that is empty, that will be built 50 years later, something like that. It will take time until the city will reach this scope. And the question is why? Why are they going back to the walls that don't really fortify an area that is almost unprotected the size of the city, and definitely double the size of the actual city at the time? This can, of course, can be explained functionally, both the fact that there are now stones there and foundations, so it's easier to use instead of rebuilding a wall completely out of scrap, and functionally in the way of security. It's easier to protect this side of the city than just the city of David or just Temple Mount. It gives better security. And I'm not doubting these things. Probably they were there. But even if there was the other thing that I'm going to suggest now wasn't really active in their minds, this is what it created. They are coming back to the walls of their forefather kings. Exactly the lineage that they are trying to say, we are the right legitimate lineage to continue David and Solomon and Hezekiah and Josiah, the favorable kings, according to the biblical literature. So what they are doing, knowingly or unintentionally, is kind of reactivating this idea of a symbol. They're taking the walls, they're making them their own, and they're saying, so we are the continuation of that symbol. So destruction, not anymore. All of these buildings are disappeared. We don't want to remember destruction. We want to remember the strong and good kings that we think that we have the right to rule after them. And so again, the destruction of or Jerusalem of the Iron Age becomes a very, very active symbol within the new landscape of Jerusalem of the early Hasmonean period and later. And if we think of it, these walls are very active and also today, especially for the crowd that is sitting here today. Thank you very much.
I now want to invite Dr. Shlomit Weksler-Bdolah, an archaeologist at the Israel Antiquities Authority since 1990. Shlomit mainly excavated in the old city of Jerusalem and its surroundings, including the remains of the Eastern Corridor in the Western Wall Plaza, remains of the early Roman and later Roman periods in the Western Wall tunnels, segments of ancient fortifications around the walls of Jerusalem and near the pool of Siloam, and more. Her main areas of research are related to the urban archaeology of Jerusalem, the city's fortifications, and the development of the urban layout, especially the surroundings of the Temple Mount. Among her main publications is the book Ilia Capitolina, Archaeology of Jerusalem in the Roman Period, and volumes of the final excavation report of the Western Wall Plaza, and more.
Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to congratulate Jodi on the publication of her excellent book, Jerusalem Through the Ages, and thank the organizers of the evening for inviting me to take part in this discussion. I'd like to begin with some general topics about the book's contribution and uniqueness, and maybe I will repeat some of the things my friend said already. The book discusses the history and archaeology of Jerusalem over 2,000 years, from the Jebusite period to the Crusades period, during which Jerusalem turned from a small village in the Judean mountains to an important and holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The book is well written and easy to follow. It enables a good understanding of the archaeological findings in their historical context and is suitable for both the lay reader and the expert researcher. Jodi is well acquainted with the historical background of Jerusalem and with the archaeological method. Along with her excellent ability to tell a story, she manages to present extremely complex information in a simple and easy way, as they described it. Jodi reads Hebrew and English very well. It is obvious that she has read all the preliminary and final archaeological reports that were published in recent years in Hebrew and English alike, and integrated the information in the right context. In addition, Jodi is an expert in the study of pottery and is well aware of the importance of what we call small finds, that is, coins, pottery, glassware, metalware, etc., in illuminating the daily life of the city's residents during the various periods. These abilities allow Jodi to discuss the history of the city through the ages based on buildings of different types that were discovered, together with information arising from inscriptions and small finds, which contribute to the understanding of the daily life of the city's residents and the municipal management. The book, I'm sure, will be very helpful to anyone studying the history and archaeology of Jerusalem. Now, with due care, I would like to discuss some topics related to the history of the city during the Roman and Byzantine periods, or specifically the limits of Aelia Capitolina, the question of the North Wall, and the role of Damascus Gate. Various proposals have been suggested in the past regarding the limits of Aelia Capitolina at the time of its foundation. Most researchers agree that the old city, within the boundaries of the Ottoman wall today, preserves more or less the remains of both Aelia Capitolina and the camp of the 10th Legion that was located somewhere near it. Some, however, have suggested that the military camp extended over the entire summit of the Western Hill, including Mount Zion, which is currently outside the Ottoman wall, like this, for example. Another issue discussed in the research literature is related to the history of the city's fortifications, or when were city walls built around the city of Aelia Capitolina and what was their extent? Most researchers accept the opinion that Aelia Capitolina was not surrounded by a wall when it was founded by Hadrian in around 130 CE, and its limits then were marked by freestanding city gates in the four main directions, Damascus Gate being the northern one. A wall was built around the perimeter of Aelia Capitolina accordingly in around the year 300, after the 10th Roman Legion, who stayed in the city and protected it, was transferred to Aila. Others suggest the Roman city was never walled, and a wall was built around the city for the first time in the Byzantine period, between the later 4th and mid-5th century. The wall that was then built is portrayed on the Madaba mosaic, and its archaeological remains are well known in several places. It surrounded an area bigger than the old city, enclosing with its boundaries the areas of the old city and an area south of it, which included Mount Zion and the city of David. Unlike the majority of scholars, Jodi Magness presents a different opinion regarding the limits of Aelia Capitolina and the date of its fortifications. According to Magness, Aelia Capitolina was indeed walled from the very beginning of its foundations, reusing for its northern defense the remains of the third wall, a Second Temple period wall line, of which sections have been discovered for a length of about 1 kilometer, 1,000 meters, about 400 meters to the north and parallel to the Ottoman wall, including sections beneath the Albright Institute where we are now. Correspondingly, Magness reconstructs the domain of the Roman city as if it included, in addition to the northern half of the old city, a more or less similar area north of the old city, so that the total area of the Roman city extended between the Jaffa Gate Temple Mount line in the south and the Albright Institute at the north. The Roman period Triple Gate, the Damascus Gate, which is considered by many to be the northern gate of Aelia Capitolina, was actually a freestanding decorative arch located at the center of the city, according to Magness. Magness's proposal raises a few issues on which I would like to comment briefly. The first, the identification of the Damascus Gate Roman period triple arch as a decorative arch is less likely in my eyes, certainly due to the two north-facing towers on its both sides, which form an integral part of the gate structure. Damascus Gate is clearly distinguished from the Ecce Homo arch, for example, which is indeed a freestanding decorative arch at a public square in Aelia Capitolina. Damascus Gate, with its tall towers on both sides, looks more like a city gate with a defensive function than a decorative arch in a central square, in my view. Number two, there are no Roman period building remains in the area north of the old city, which, according to Magness' proposal, is included in the city limits. It stands in contrast to the many remains that are known in the northern part of the old city, an area considered by all as part of Aelia Capitolina, where colonnaded streets, public squares, and monumental structures, including 3 freestanding arches, are known. Had the area north of the old city also been part of the colony, one would expect some remains to have been found. Number 3, regarding the reuse of the Second Temple period third wall as the north wall of Aelia Capitolina, the archaeological data it relies on is not sufficiently clear. The accepted view is that this wall line was built in the 1st century CE, in the Second Temple period. Is there any evidence for its restoration during Hadrian's time? And if so, where? In addition to that, where are the walls that surrounded the Hadrianic city in the east and west? These are also unknown. Gideon Avni conclusions when he studied the cemeteries of Aelia Capitolina was that the remains of the third wall remained protruding above the surface after the year 70, and they marked the line from which the cemeteries of the Roman city extended further to the north. This created a reserve of land north of Damascus Gate to which the city could expand if necessary. It is not claimed, however, that this line was restored for this purpose. Admittedly, Jodi discusses a Latin inscription whose 2 parts were discovered near the remains of the third wall and suggests reconstructing a monumental arch at the site, at the top of which the inscription was placed. The arch was originally built by the soldiers of the 10th Legion to honor Hadrian's visit to Jerusalem in the year 129 or 130, and was later incorporated as the northern gate of Aelia Capitolina into the root of the third wall, according to Magness. Thus, Magness connects the Hadrianic inscription to an arch that was built into the root of the third wall and functioned as a city gate of Aelia Capitolina. But it should be noted, with due caution, that at the moment, we do not know of any remains of an arch or any other structure that bore the inscription in question, and there are other suggestions regarding the original location. Since the fragments of the inscription were not discovered in situ, it is difficult to discuss its origin with certainty. Now, in the next 2 minutes, there's another issue that I'd like to comment on briefly, which is related to the foundation of Aelia Capitolina. Jodi, how could I skip it? Magness supports the accepted view that the foundation of Aelia Capitolina was declared by Hadrian during his visit to Jerusalem at 129-130 CE, and it was only after the declaration that the construction works of the new city began. Whereas, in my opinion, and according to the conclusions of a large group of researchers working on the excavations in the Western Wall Plaza, of the Eastern Corridor in the Western Wall Plaza, Alexander On, Shua Kiselevich, Gabi Bichovsky, Renate Rosenthal Egenbottom, Lea Disegni, Yael Gorin Rosen, Natalia Katzenelson, Liora Urwitz, Guy Stiebel, and others, Elizabeth Boareto, many, that each one was working on something, analyzing and dating the abundance of small finds that were found. We proposed a slightly different course of events. According to our proposal, Hadrian decided to rebuild Jerusalem shortly after he came to power, that is already in the 20s of the 2nd century, and the construction operations began 5 to 10 years before his arrival to Jerusalem. Upon his arrival in 129, 130, some sections of the city were already built, and Hadrian actually cut the ribbon and announced the official foundation of the Roman city then. The small funds on which we based our proposal to date the preparatory works done on the site of the 20s of the 2nd century rather than the 30s were all published. In short, it can be said that the assemblage of the small finds that were found at the site included vessel types that were first manufactured at the late 1st to early 2nd century without known vessel types that begin to appear in Jerusalem only after the year 130. This topic is too broad to be detailed at present here. Either way, these are examples of legitimate disagreements, I believe, between scholars. What is important, in my view, is that throughout the book, when Magness discusses disputed matters, she offers the reader a summary of the various opinions, thus allowing him or her to decide based on all possibilities. In conclusion, I cannot think of anyone else who could have summarized the wealth of historical information and archaeological data in such a clear, simple, and at the same time supremely academic way. For that, I really appreciate the breadth of Jodi's knowledge and writing talent, and I am sure that this book will become a basic book or textbook for anyone interested in the history of the city. Just like her book on the ceramics of Jerusalem in the Roman and Byzantine periods, which has become, in our words, the Bible of the archaeologists working in Jerusalem. So thank you, Jodi.
Our third speaker is Professor Gideon Avni, who is the chief archaeologist for the Israel Antiquities Authority and professor of archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where we both were students for a first degree in archaeology back in the Canaanite period. His academic interests focus on various aspects of classical, late antique, and Islamic archaeology, and the archaeology of Jerusalem and its hinterlands, nomads and sedentary societies in the desert areas of the Near East, Mediterranean connectivity in late antiquity and early Islamic times, the diffusion and movement of technologies, plants, species, and people across Eurasia, and environmental archaeology. During the past 40 years, he conducted extensive field work in the Negev Desert, Beit Guvrin, and Judean lowlands, Jerusalem, of course, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and Ramla. He has authored 6 monographs and more than 150 articles, and among his recent books are Unearthing Jerusalem, 150 years of archaeological research in the Holy City with Galore, and the Byzantine Islamic transition in Palestine, an archaeological approach, and New Old City, Jerusalem in the late Roman period.
Thank you, Vered, and thank you for organizing this wonderful evening. Before taking you, diving to some of the issues of the so-called later periods, as in the last speaker, I would like more generally to address the 2 questions that Jodi put forward in the first page of the preface of this book. And this is, why do we need another book on Jerusalem? There are so many of them, not even used to count them. And who is going to benefit? Who is going to learn from this book? Now, in order to answer these 2 questions from my own personal perspective, I would like to take us just for a minute, about 40 years backwards, not far away from here, at Mount Scopus, the Institute of Archaeology, when we were both students. I think we are the same age, but you are older than me and Vered in the university, because, you know, we are doing the usual Israeli track of long army service, traveling in the world and so on. But in the mid-80s, that was the time, I think, when we first met. And I remember that I understood that you are writing a PhD on chronology and pottery of Jerusalem. So I thought between myself, I think, with all the glory of Jerusalem, with all the magnificent monuments, the splendor of the city, the rich history, write a PhD, excuse me, about pottery, such a boring topic. That's now, needless to say, I was completely wrong on this attitude, because the PhD and the first book you wrote on the Jerusalem ceramic chronology, as well as Shlomit said, really became one of the landmarks in the archaeology of Jerusalem, because unlike most scholarship, if I may say, starting from the founding fathers and going on to our teachers like Avigad and Mazar, who wrote all kinds of descriptions, conclusions, speculations, may I say, without basing on the basic tools of archaeology, like looking at stratigraphy, looking at pottery, the small finding, establishing chronology. And actually, this is what you did. And if I'm going from your 1992 book to the recent one, I think there's one line which answers these two questions, because I've been reading, sections of this book in the last weeks. First of all, it is based on data. It's based on archaeological tools, on facts. And there is no question about being the most updated book written about Jerusalem. For somebody who follows the recent discovery in the city, I think you succeeded in actually monitoring every significant discovery, including this beautiful inscription that was discovered right behind the corner of the time of Justinian and so on, which really put the whole question of 6th century Jerusalem and just the Justinian construction into a new understanding, if I would say. And you really follow all the very recent discoveries in Jerusalem, evaluating them and using the updated material. So this goes to the two questions of why we need another book. This is not another book. I think it will serve as a kind of milestone for everything that has been done in the city, and from here onwards, things that will be done in terms of archaeology in Jerusalem. And I would say even this is the uniqueness of this new book. Now, I would like to address some of the specific issues. I have a lot to say about Ilya Capitolino, but I'm not going to put myself between Shlomit and Jodi. I can tell you only one thing regarding the northern wall of Ilya, which is located right here. And when you published your first articles about this, it was, I think, 2000, I was dealing with the necropolis of Jerusalem. So I can only say that it was kind of, I can call it intellectual dance or academic dance between us. And the dispute was a kind of pleasure. I mean, sharpening the mind, and we had a lot of discussions then. And we published all these materials, and knowing how it goes with other scholars, it was really a pleasure, I must say. And I think that other people will agree with me. Now, I would like, as the last speaker, and the book goes up to the Crusader period, I would like to point maybe 2 or 3 specific issues in which, again, our academic interests, our research met along the years. The first is the story or the event of the Persian Sasanian conquest of Jerusalem, or raid on Jerusalem, 614, which was addressed mainly through the historical text. We have a very colorful descriptions about the Christian massacre, the collecting of the bones of the victims, and so on. And already in 1992, you published a paper about evidence for this event in the European Valley, in the city of David, which I think changed the mind of many people, specifically about this event, and more generally about looking at the impact of a single event on the history of the city, in contrast to the long durée processes. And then, indeed, you continued collecting the data which relate specifically to this event. We have this again paper with all are summarized in the book about the northern wall of Jerusalem, the present day, the Byzantine wall, and the evidence of the Persian conquest. And exactly at the same time, I made a contribution about the evidence of these massacre sites around the city in one end, and the fact that we don't see a dramatic change on the long durée of Jerusalem, in the other hand, for this specific event. And again, it was a kind of meeting of academic interest, research interest, providing data, which without your contribution, I think the history of the 614 Persian invasion could not have been clarified at the state it is now. In the same way, if I'm moving forward in time, the relationships to the so-called Umayyad palaces constructed in the early Islamic period, late 7th, early 8th century, in south of the Temple Mount of the Haram al-Sharif. And again, there's a lot of descriptions were made on these buildings since their discoveries in the Mazar and Bentov excavation, treating the architecture, speculating about the dating. But in fact, it was only the valuation of the pottery finds from the Gadot, and from the very few levels that remain. Unfortunately, these excavations were not published as they should have been done. And in this very, very specific and careful evaluation of the few finds, again, the chronological framework of this building was established much more accurately, thanks to these boring topics of chronology and of stratigraphy and pottery. Now, the last comments I would like to make is not relating specifically about Jerusalem, but it relates to the value of ceramics and of pottery. One of your articles, which times and again I'm quoting, is the article about the early Islamic pottery evidence of revolution in diet and dining habits. And to my opinion, this is an excellent example how a ceramic repertoire have a huge impact on evaluating changes in a society on the long term, because the changes in the household pottery during the early Islamic period signified a much large and significant process. I mean, the change in diet from Mediterranean, the introduction of few foodstuff, the fact that the cooking changes its appearance, and it affects not only local traditions, but I'm now dealing a little bit with some kind of Eurasian perspective. This is a specific type of data and contribution that will be used in the future in order to understand better changes in society. So thanks again for this contribution, and I can only wish to write the updated version in something between 5 or 10 years from now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I actually have written comments, but I have to start with the pot. First of all, Shlomit and I love each other dearly and disagree on some points very collegially and respect each other. And I don't know,
at some point we may or may not come to an agreement, but thank you. And I have to say something about the pottery, since you brought up the pottery and how it came about. And so what happened is when I worked as a guide at the En-Gedi Field School from 1977 to 1980, I got really interested in the Byzantine monasteries of the Judean desert. And when I started graduate school a couple of years later at the University of Pennsylvania in classical archaeology, I came in wanting to do, as my dissertation topic, the Byzantine monasteries of the Judean desert. And that first summer, after my first year of graduate school, I came back to Jerusalem, and I was in the Institute. I was wandering around the Institute of Archaeology, and found out that there were 2 graduate students here already writing their dissertations on that very topic, Yisar Hirschfeld and Yossi Patrick. And so it was clear that I wouldn't be able to write my dissertation on that topic. I was pretty crushed. And I was talking to various people, and I happened to be talking to Nira Naveh, who at the time was the librarian at the Institute of Archaeology. And she said to me, well, why should, maybe you should write your pottery on this, your dissertation on Byzantine pottery. And she said, people have been buzzing around it like flies, but nobody's ever touched it. And I thought to myself, I like pottery. I could do that. And that's how I ended up doing pottery. So yeah, and it wasn't boring. But anyway, okay, so for the written comments. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's launch of my Jerusalem book, and I am honored that Vered, Yuval, Shlomit, and Gideon agreed to participate in this panel. I am grateful for their comments on my book and look forward to continuing to learn about Jerusalem from them and others. Although writing a book about Jerusalem from its beginnings to the Crusades may seem to be an act of hubris, it has been an extremely humbling experience because Jerusalem's story is infinite. The more one knows about this city, the more one realizes the limitations of that knowledge. Jerusalem is a moving target because new discoveries constantly add to and modify our understanding of its history and archaeology, practically guaranteeing that any book like this will require updating almost as soon as it's published. Thank you for, by the way, mentioning that. In addition, it is virtually impossible to ensure that a book of such broad coverage will be completely free of errors or omissions. For these reasons, as I explain in the preface, it was only after years of nagging by a persistent editor, Stefan Vranka, at Oxford University Press, that I agreed to write this book. And even then, with great trepidation, acutely aware that there are others who know a great deal more about Jerusalem than I do. Many of these are colleagues, friends, and teachers from whom I have learned much over the years. Their names appear throughout the pages of the book, and some of them are in attendance today. A few pieces of background about the book. For one thing, it turned out to be weedier than originally envisioned, as I found it impossible to tell Jerusalem's complex story without getting into details. Thus, it is more of a semi-trade book than a trade book. Nevertheless, I have endeavored to explain the history and archaeology as clearly as possible to make the book accessible to a broad readership. Following an introduction and a survey of Jerusalem's explorers are chapters presenting the history and archaeology in sequence from the Bronze Age to the Crusades. Focusing each chapter on a specific year in Jerusalem's history is intended to reduce the potential confusion caused by covering numerous periods spanning millennia, particularly for non-specialist readers. Only deceased explorers are included in the survey in Chapter 1 because it was unfeasible to include all the living archaeologists working in Jerusalem with whom readers will become familiar throughout the other chapters. And I also didn't want to get into a situation where I mentioned some and then omitted others and they started to complain. The book ends with the Crusades, as that is the limit of my expertise. And in fact, going beyond the early Islamic period was a stretch for me. It was the editor who insisted that I include the Crusades. A brief epilogue describes General Allenby's entry to Jerusalem, followed by an appendix with suggested walking tours. I am happy with the way the book turned out, although I realize it is not perfect and not everyone will agree with every part of my presentation and interpretations. Nowhere is the adage that no man or woman is an island truer than in academia. This book could not have been written without the support of various institutions and individuals including a Kingdon Fellowship at the Institute for Research in the Humanities at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Fulbright Senior Research Fellowship at Tel Aviv University, and a Seymour Gitin Distinguished Professorship here at the Albright Institute, where I resided in Hostel Room 9 overlooking this courtyard. There's my window. I wish to give shout outs to Stephen Nadler, the director of the IRH, Vered Noam, who issued the invitation for a Fulbright to Tel Aviv University, and Yuval Rotman, who hosted me at TAU and who proposed this book launch, who's not here with us, he's out of the country. Matt Adams, the director of the Albright at the time of my fellowship, and the Albright staff for their warm hospitality as the world emerged from the COVID pandemic. I am also grateful for the support provided by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, especially the chair and staff of the Department of Religious Studies. Last but not least, my husband, Jim Haberman, who is back in the US but is lurking somewhere out there in Zoom land, gets the credit for preparing the illustrations for publication. Even among the great cities of the Mediterranean world, such as Athens, Rome, and Istanbul, Jerusalem is special. I am sure everyone here shares my love of this extraordinary city. My hope is that this book will convey to a wide audience the qualities that make Jerusalem special by telling its fascinating and complex story. I am not going to speak about specific aspects of Jerusalem's history and archaeology, as I hope you will read the book instead. Rather, let us continue our conversations over the delicious refreshments prepared by Chef Hisham, who kept the fellows well fed during my stay at the Albright. To conclude, please join me in thanking Jamie Fraser, the Albright director, Michael Johnson, the assistant director, and the rest of the staff for hosting, organizing, and publicizing this event. And thanks to all of you for honoring me with your presence today.
Thank you very much, Jodi, and thank you to all of our panel. And just to add a few more thanks, this has been a collaboration with Michael Johnson, the assistant director here, has really pulled together, and particularly thanks to Yuval Rotman at Tel Aviv University, Michael Weiss at the Koret Center, Joe Wojtkowski at the Oxford University Press, and of course to Michael himself. This year marks 99 years of the Albright in this building. Next year, 2025, is 100. You may have seen something about a centennial campaign that we're pursuing at the moment. We would like to be here for another 100 years to come, so that scholars like Jodi can pump out the next edition of Jerusalem and its follow-on academic successes. I really encourage you and invite you to be part of this campaign. Please go onto our webpage. You will find pathways for giving, including the options of buying a named paving stone, which we will be using in our garden in a small feature grotto. And I will always be very, very happy to speak to people one-on-one if they would really like to get behind this more personally. Meanwhile, I think you've all seen the best Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever present possibly for 2024, and that is Jodi's book. You can get that online through Oxford University Press. The code for that 30% discount, I said I'd repeat it, is capital AAFLYG6, AAFLYG6. But enough of that. As Jodi has said, it is now time for, well, the refreshments. So what you will find is in the room behind us, for all those who have been in residence, it's the Fellows' dining room. It's a bit of a bottleneck in the doorway, but if you go in one way, you can load up your plate with the wonders that Hisham and his staff have been concocting in the kitchen for the last couple of days. Then come out the other room and cycle back into the courtyard. You will find wine, water, tea and coffee under the cloisters in the side. And there are a couple of bathrooms just next to or inside those big green doors over there for those who've had enough of the wine. Thank you all very much for coming, but please join me in thanking our panelists and particularly Jodi. Thank you.
politics.